You turn 30 and something shifts. The people around you seem to have figured something out that you haven't. Your college friend just bought a second property as an investment. Your coworker keeps talking about their seven-figure net worth. Your neighbor is sending their kids to private school. Meanwhile, you're wondering if you should be panicking about retirement or if the panic itself is normal. What's really happening is you've crossed a threshold where the gap between appearance and reality becomes impossible to ignore. The things that looked aspirational in your 20s now look impossible in your 30s. You're no longer young enough for excuses, you're old enough to expect results. But here's the thing, nobody tells you about turning 30. Most of the financial success you're seeing around you has absolutely nothing to do with talent or hard work or smart decisions. It has everything to do with leverage, inheritance, timing, and the most dangerous game of all, pretending that everyone else has figured it out when the truth is most people are more confused than you are. Let me show you what's actually happening behind the scenes, because once you understand the mechanics, you're going to feel a lot less like you've somehow failed at adulthood. When you turn 30, people expect you to have things figured out. A career, a home, investments, maybe a family. The timeline is real in people's minds, even if the timeline doesn't match reality for most of us. But here's where the pressure becomes dangerous. In your 30s, you're entering what I call the illusion peak. This is when the gap between what people show you and what's actually true reaches its maximum width. Walk into any social gathering for people in their 30s, and what do you hear about? The new house, the investment portfolio, the job promotions, the family vacations, the renovations. Nobody's talking about the anxiety. Nobody's mentioning the debt. Nobody's admitting that their beautiful home is strapped to them like a financial anchor. They're projecting forward motion because that's what 30-year-olds are supposed to do. But let me tell you what's actually happening in those beautiful homes across suburbia. According to recent data from the Federal Reserve and housing reports, people in their 30s are more leveraged than ever. The average 30-year-old who owns a home is carrying not just a mortgage, but often student loans, car payments, and credit card debt simultaneously. They've built a financial house of cards, and they're terrified someone will notice. Here's the real situation for the typical 30-year-old making what we'll call a solid income of about $80,000 a year. That sounds good, right? That sounds like you should be doing fine. But $80,000 before taxes is really more like $55,000 after federal, state, and FICA taxes. So you're working with roughly $4,500 a month in actual take-home pay. Now let's allocate that realistically. If you bought a home in this market, and let's say you were smart and got something modest for $375,000 with 5% down, you're financing the rest. Your mortgage, taxes, insurance, and HOA fees are eating up about $2,000 of that $4,500. That's already 44% of gross income, which is way above the recommended 30% threshold. Add in a car payment because you need reliable transportation, and you're probably not buying a paid-off 10-year-old vehicle when you're 30, you're thinking about replacing it. That's another $400 to $600. Insurance, gas, and maintenance on that car adds another $300. You're now at $2,800 a month before you've bought a single grocery or paid a utility bill. Utilities, groceries, and basic living expenses are another $1,200 to $1,500. You're at $4,000 to $4,100 already. And we haven't talked about your phone, your internet, your insurance payments, student loans, or the fact that you probably have some credit card debt lingering from your 20s. The crushing reality is that most 30-year-olds are living with almost zero margin for error. But the visibility is what makes it dangerous. Because you can see your neighbor's new kitchen renovation. You can see your friend's vacation photos from Mexico. You can see the new furniture people are buying. What you can't see is the credit card statement that paid for it. What you can't see is the late night panic when the car needs a repair and there's barely $500 in savings. This is the illusion that destroys people in their 30s. The illusion that by 30, you're supposed to have wealth accumulation happening naturally, that by 30, investment returns should be compounding, that by 30, you should be seeing real progress on net worth. But here's what the data actually says. According to wealth distribution studies, the median net worth for a 30-year-old in America is somewhere around $60,000 to $80,000. For those people, the majority of that is whatever home equity they have, and they can't spend home equity. It's trapped capital. The actual liquid net worth, the cash and investments they could actually access, is often under $10,000. Some people in their 30s have negative net worth when you subtract their debts from their assets. This is the financial reality nobody wants to discuss at dinner parties. You're 30 years old, and you might be worth less than someone who dropped out of high school and invested in Bitcoin 5 years ago by pure luck. The game is rigged from the start, and the rules change constantly. Here's another dynamic that becomes critical once you're in your 30s. The comparison becomes more painful because the stakes are higher. In your 20s, everyone's kind of figuring it out together. You're all broke, you're all in entry-level jobs, you're all struggling with the basics, but at 30, the stratification becomes visible. Some people had parents who helped them with down payments. Some people got inheritance. Some people found partners with higher incomes. Some people got lucky with job timing and are making significantly more than their peers. And now everyone's pretending it all came from their personal achievement. Nobody wants to admit that their real estate investment success was actually built on a $200,000 gift from their parents. Nobody wants to mention that their partner's income is subsidizing their lifestyle. Nobody wants to acknowledge that they had a 5-year head start because they went to the right school and knew the right people. But that's exactly what's happening. The wealth gap that opens up in your 30s is mostly about who had help, not about who worked harder. This is where the actual wealth building gets interesting. According to research on wealth inheritance and family money, about 65% of the wealth Americans have in their 30s came directly from family assistance. Down payments, parental loans, gifts, paying off debts, covering expenses while they start businesses. This is the invisible income that never shows up on a tax return and never gets mentioned on social media. Let's say your friend from college just bought a house. The down payment was $80,000. You're thinking, wow, they must be making incredible money and saving aggressively. But what you don't know is their parents gave them $60,000 of that. They only saved $20,000 over 3 years. Suddenly their achievement looks a lot different when you understand the actual structure behind it. This is what creates the generational wealth gap that becomes unmistakable by your 30s. The people whose parents had money are compounding that advantage. The people whose parents didn't have money are starting from zero. And everyone's pretending that effort is the differentiator when effort is actually just the baseline requirement. But here's where it gets darker. Because you're 30 now, and 30 is when society stops giving you grace for not having it figured out. 30 is when people start asking real questions. You're supposed to be established. You're supposed to be building towards something. You're supposed to be accumulating wealth, not still scraping by month to month. This is when the pressure becomes internalized. You start believing that failure is personal rather than structural. The reality is that your 30s are when the debt becomes most dangerous. In your 20s, debt feels temporary. You're young, you have time to fix it. But in your 30s, debt starts to feel permanent. You've made commitments. You have a mortgage maybe, or a car loan, or both. You have student loans that never seem to shrink. And now you're seeing how quickly compounding interest works against you instead of for you. The average person in their 30s with any credit card debt is paying somewhere between $3,000 to $5,000 a year, just in interest payments. That's money that vanishes. It doesn't build anything, it just flows from your account to the bank. And if you have multiple debts with different interest rates, you're in what I call the debt juggling phase. You're paying minimums here, making aggressive payments there, trying to manage a system that was literally designed to keep you in it. Here's the psychological component that nobody discusses. In your 30s, you're old enough to see the actual cost of your 20s. The student loan debt that seemed fine at the time is now competing with your ability to save for retirement. The car loans you took out are preventing you from buying real estate. The credit card debt is sitting there like a parasite, and every month you're paying interest to debt instead of building wealth to yourself. This is when people often make desperate decisions. They take on more debt to try to look successful because looking successful feels like the only way to feel successful. They buy the house because society says 30-year-olds own homes, not because they can actually afford it. They buy the car because their peers are buying cars. They book the vacation because everyone's posting vacation photos. And they're funding it all on credit because there's no way to fund it on actual income. The truly dangerous thing about your 30s is that banks will let you do this. They will absolutely give you a mortgage for a home you can't actually afford. They will give you an auto loan for a car that's 40% of your annual income. They will increase your credit card limits automatically. The system wants you to borrow. Your ability to service debt is all that matters. But here's what people in their 30s don't think about. You're compounding in the wrong direction. You're building negative net worth. You're creating obligations that will stretch into your 40s. You're locking yourself into a lifestyle that requires continuous high income to maintain. One job loss, one medical emergency, one major expense, and the whole thing collapses. And this is where your 30s become your most vulnerable financial period. You look established on the surface, but you're fragile underneath. You can't take risks. You can't change careers. You can't reduce your hours. You can't try something new. You're locked in. The person at 35 who seems to be doing so much better than you might be walking a financial tightrope and losing sleep over it. Let me talk about investments for a second, because this is another area where the 30s become a turning point. By 30, you're supposed to have retirement investing locked in. Compound interest is your friend. Time in the market beats timing the market. You should have a strategy. You should be contributing regularly. But here's what's actually happening for most people in their 30s. Only about 48% of people in their 30s have any retirement savings at all. The median retirement account balance for this age group is under $60,000. That sounds okay until you realize that most of that is probably in a 401k that hasn't been maxed out consistently. The people who are actually investing seriously and consistently are a small minority. The people who are talking confidently about their portfolio at work are even more of a minority. This creates a distorted impression of what's normal. You're in an office where you hear about investment strategies from the people who are investing. You don't hear from the 48% who aren't doing it. You think everyone's crushing it financially when statistically most people are still behind on retirement savings, well into their 30s. This is selection bias at full strength. What's more dangerous is that by your 30s, you're running out of time for compound interest to do the heavy lifting. You have maybe 35 years until retirement if you're lucky. That's still a lot of time, but it's not infinite. The person who starts serious investing at 25 has a massive advantage over the person who starts at 35. And once you're 30, you're acutely aware that you might be on the wrong side of that calculation. This is when people make another dangerous decision. They try to catch up. They take investment risks they shouldn't. They invest in meme stocks and cryptocurrency because they feel like they're behind and they need to catch up fast. They chase returns, they follow hot tips, they do everything you're not supposed to do with investing because the pressure of time is more psychologically powerful than the rationality of a strategy. Here's another truth nobody tells you about your 30s. Your 30s are when you stop being special. Your 20s had an excuse built in. You were young. You were figuring it out. Failure was expected. But at 30, the world stops making excuses for you. You didn't get the big break you hoped for at work? That's too bad. Everyone else figured out how to advance. You didn't manage to save money? Well, everyone else found a way. You're still living paycheck to paycheck? That's starting to feel like a personal failure rather than a structural problem. But that's exactly the opposite of what's actually true. Your 30s are when you're most likely to be trapped by decisions you made in your 20s that you can't undo. You're stuck with student loan debt that you have to repay. You're stuck with a mortgage if you bought too early or too much. You're stuck with a spouse or ex with different financial values. You're stuck with a job that you took because you needed health insurance and now it's been 10 years. The real financial truth of your 30s is that you're dealing with the compounding effects of a decade of imperfect decisions. Some of those decisions seemed fine at the time, some of them seemed necessary. But now they're all compounding together and they're hard to escape. Let me give you some real numbers on what this looks like. Take someone who graduated at 22 with $100,000 in student loans. That's actually pretty common now. They got their loan payment set up for 10 years and they're paying about $1,200 a month. They graduated, got a job making $55,000 and felt broke immediately. They never had a chance to adjust their lifestyle downward from college, so they kept spending about the same. They didn't save anything for the first 5 years out of school because there was no money left after expenses. By their late 20s, they're starting to feel the weight. They want to buy a house, but they have no down payment saved. They have no emergency fund. they're still paying student loans. They're thinking they'll get married and combine incomes and then they can buy a house. That's a fantasy that works great until it doesn't. Until they meet someone with similar debt and similar income, and suddenly their combined financial situation is actually worse because they both have obligations. Now they're 30. One of them got a better job and they're making $80,000. They think this is their chance. They scrape together a down payment, maybe 3%, and they buy a house for $350,000. The monthly payment is $2,000. The student loans are still $1,200. They're maxed out, they're at the limit of what the bank will give them, and they're terrified every single month. This is the reality of your 30s for most people. You're not broke because you're bad with money. You're broke because you're dealing with the accumulated weight of a decade of decisions that seemed fine at the time, but are now collectively crushing you. Here's something important that you need to hear. If you're in your 30s and you're feeling like you're failing financially, there's a very high probability that you're doing better than you think. The financial wins that actually matter don't get posted. Nobody's posting about their $300 emergency fund that they just completed. Nobody's celebrating that they paid off a credit card. Nobody's documenting the month where they spent less than they earned. But these are the things that actually matter. The flashy financial wins, the new house, the new car, the vacation, those are often markers of money leaving your account, not building up in it. The quiet financial wins, the consistency, the discipline, the boring choices, those are what actually builds wealth over time. But here's the difficult part about your 30s. This is when you have to make a choice about what actually matters. Are you going to continue playing the comparison game, or are you going to opt out? Because opting out is possible, but it requires being comfortable looking less successful than you could appear to be. Let's say you're making that $80,000. You could stretch and buy a $400,000 house, but that would consume nearly all of your income. Or you could buy a $325,000 house and suddenly you have room to breathe. Or you could rent for a few more years and actually build a down payment. That means something. You could finance a new car payment that eats up $600 a month. Or you could drive a paid-off 8-year-old car and invest that $600 every month. Do that for 5 years and you have $36,000 plus returns. Do it for 10 years and you have $60,000. That's a down payment without the debt. But it requires looking less successful in the meantime, and that's the choice. And in your 30s, that choice becomes excruciating because success is now visible in a way it wasn't in your 20s. Everyone's buying homes, everyone's upgrading cars, everyone's doing renovations. The pressure to keep up is at an all-time high. Here's what I want you to understand about your 30s. This is the most important financial decade of your life, not because it's when you should be successful, but because it's when the decisions you make will compound for the next 30 years. The person who decides to drive an old car and invest the difference at 30 will be in a completely different financial position at 40, 50, and 60 than the person who finances a new car and tells themselves they deserve it. The person who decides to rent instead of buying a home they can't afford at 30 will have the flexibility to take a job they love at 35 instead of being locked into a soul-crushing career. The person who decides to pay down debt aggressively instead of keeping up appearances will have options at 40. But making those decisions requires something that's in short supply in your 30s, clarity. You need to be able to look past the comparison game and see your own situation clearly. You need to know what matters to you, not what's supposed to matter to you. You need to be willing to look average while you're building something substantial. Here's the honest truth about your 30s. Most people are terrified. Most people are one major expense away from financial crisis. Most people are keeping up appearances while feeling like frauds underneath. Most people have no idea if they're on track for retirement or if they're already behind. Most people are experiencing financial anxiety that they never talk about. But you know what separates the people who actually build wealth from the people who don't? It's not that they earn more, although some of them do. It's that they made peace with looking average. They stopped caring what their neighbor drives. They stopped trying to keep up with people who aren't actually their peers. They got comfortable being the person who's driving the old car while everyone else is financing new ones. The psychological shift you need to make in your 30s is from external validation to internal metrics. Stop measuring success against other people's highlight reels. Start measuring it against your own timeline. Are you better off this year than you were last year? Are you closer to your actual goals? Are you more financially secure than you were at 25? Those are the only metrics that matter. And if you're making progress on those metrics, you're already ahead of most people. You're just not posting about it. And that's more than fine. That's how wealth actually builds, quietly, consistently, without fanfare. The financial truth that nobody tells you after 30 is this: the game you think everyone's winning is designed to make you lose. The success you're seeing is mostly illusion. The wealth you think other people have is mostly leverage. The security you think they're building is mostly fragile. And your job is not to keep up with them. Your job is to build something real for yourself while everyone else is performing. When you're 60, you won't care about the photos of the vacation you didn't take. You won't miss the car you didn't finance. You won't regret the house you didn't stretch to buy. But you will be grateful for the financial security that quiet decisions built. And that's the real prize. Not the stuff, not the appearance, the actual freedom to live your life without constant financial anxiety.